None of this is really female specific, so that's great in the sense that it's going to be super applicable for all of your clients. However, it's a great area because it's kind of relevant regardless of who you're training, males, females, athletes, weight gain, weight loss, like whatever it is. You know, stress is in everyone's lives. So this is a super relevant presentation, kind of regardless of who you are training. Just before we get into it very quickly, if you have been a little bit of a lurker in the group so far, not really engaged with it, not really grabbed any Insta stories, not dropped any comments or feedback, then please do your best to try and change that. There definitely is a good difference to how the community feels in a group when everyone's kind of doing that versus not doing that. And my end, obviously, if I'm able to add a bunch of your stories to my story every week for 8 weeks, then obviously that's going to look very, very different when it's time to open for intake 2. So that'd be massively appreciated, but also just so I can deliver the best service for you possible, please get more active in sharing your comments and feedback in the group. Okay, so if you haven't already watched Monday's lesson, also, by the way, then that is fine. This one can work before Monday's lesson, no problem. Okay, so the learning outcomes from today are what the different branches of the nervous systems are, what adaptations occur when we're in the sympathetic nervous system, how supercompensation / recovery works, how we can manage stress, and then some actionable stuff on tracking and assessing. And of course, for Monday, to make more sense, and so that you can all admire my Canvas skills, because I have put a lot of them into this presentation. So now these points here are super relevant for this presentation and Monday's presentation, but of course the whole course as well. So kind of the main goal from today is to get you to think potentially differently, probably differently, and definitely critically of what we've always been doing and what we've always been told, and kind of that standard approach of just low calories, low carbs, lots of cardio, works until it doesn't work, and then who knows what, like you've broke the client kind of thing. So our job as a coach is to solve problems. Like, remember that if the client wants a transformation but they don't have the prerequisites, then that's a problem that we need to solve. And obviously that's just one example. So always remember that there is no strategy and there is no one size fits all approach. Everything must be client defined or client led. And we're working with humans, not robots. And as we go through this presentation, it will make a lot more sense why I have listed some of these things, okay? So a couple of these slides are the same from Monday, including this one. So stress is a very broad term, okay? Stress is anything that throws the body out of balance, out of homeostasis. Therefore, all stress is stress. And the total accumulation of stresses at any one time is known as allostatic load. So the fact that there is literally a name for the total amount of stress coming in to someone's life / in their body / you know, etc. It's a broad term at one time. The fact that that has a name just really highlights the importance of the fact that us as coaches need to be aware of each of these moving parts for individuals in terms of where this stress could be coming in or what could be causing stress for them. We need to be aware of that. We need to measure it. We need to manage it. And we need to take it into account with our decision making, because if it wasn't important, there wouldn't be a name for the total amount of stress at any one time, okay? And there is. So again, this slide, same as Monday's. Okay, this slide here is just showing how the hypothalamus, okay, this little part of the brain in the limbic system, okay, is the link between the nervous system and the endocrine system, because it is the start of the nervous system, okay, and as you can see up here, it is also the start of the endocrine system. So when we're then looking at any of the axes downstream for hormone production, okay, they all start with the hypothalamus, as we looked at Monday. And that is how these internal signals of stress up to the brain and external perceived stress coming in, okay, all go to the hypothalamus, which is also then the very same start of that link of that chain of events for hormone production, which just goes to show this is the first mechanism of which stress impacts our hormones. So there is a little bit of repetition here, but I think repetition is super important to learn. So that's why I'm going over some of this stuff that we went over Monday anyway, to tie it all together, and because repetition's good. So don't worry about the rest of this, okay? Well, obviously we got into some of this Monday, but we'll get into more of it today. But the point here is just this hypothalamus, okay, is the link between the nervous system, and then here the hypothalamic hormones, gonadotropin releasing hormone, etc., is then the link to the rest of the endocrine system, the rest of the hormonal system. Okay, so let's put hormones to one side for a second. Let's look at the nervous system. So as we all know, okay, from the nervous system, we have the central nervous system, which is our brain and our spinal cord. And then from that, okay, which is here in green, from that, we've then got the peripheral nervous system, which is just the rest of it. So typically what you'd see often on graphs is central put above peripheral, okay, or sometimes you'll see them next to each other. It's not really too relevant either way, okay? What we're getting into and what we need to learn is that then the peripheral nervous system branches off into two parts. Autonomic, so stuff that we don't have to voluntarily control and make happen. Our body just does it automatically. And somatic or automatic, okay? Sorry, non-automatically, so with our input. So within the autonomic nervous system, we then have the sympathetic, okay, nervous system, or SNS, so you'll see that abbreviation a lot, and the parasympathetic, okay, PNS. Also known as arousing and calming, or what you may have heard of before is fight or flight in the sympathetic state, okay, and rest and recover, or rest and digest, and that's super important in the parasympathetic state. So that's what we're going to kind of be learning today. But just for the sake of completing this, within the branches that we control, we of course have sensory input and we have motor output, so controlling our skeletal muscles. Okay, so moving on, so that's the nervous system overview as a whole. So let's look at the autonomic nervous system, okay? And it has two main branches. It technically has three branches, okay? But let's keep it simple and just say it has two branches, the parasympathetic and that sympathetic, okay? So these are the adaptations that occur when in fight or flight or when in rest and recover, okay? So what we're going to do is just work down, and obviously they're kind of just the opposite. So I'm just going to work down through the sympathetic, okay, through fight and flight. So our pupils dilate. Now, what happens here is we want to improve vision, basically, to deal with that fight or flight response. So that's obviously pretty cool, right? So our pupils dilate. Also, what happens up here in the brain, as you can see under where I've written missing, is long-term memory actually increases, which again is awesome. And why that happens is the body is basically trying to think, have I been in this situation before? Have I been in this environment before? And how did I survive? Okay, so to take a step back for a second, what we've always got to remember here is our body isn't looking for happiness or for optimal health or for in the fastest metabolism. It doesn't want any of that stuff. It just cares about survival, because for 45,000 years, we evolved as just, you know, another mammal on this planet, really having to fight for our lives and hunt for our food source. And the agricultural revolution, which was only a few thousand years ago, has changed a lot for us, but our evolution hasn't really changed. So all of these adaptations here, okay, under the sympathetic nervous system, are to deal with that fight or flight response, to keep us alive and to keep us able to find food, okay? So that's why our vision improves, and that's why our long-term memory improves as well. So next, it inhibits the production of saliva, okay? Why? Because we're not interested in digestion if we're trying to run for our lives or defend ourselves, okay? Airways relax so that we can basically expand them more and get more air in. Our heart rate increases. Everyone kind of knows that. The reasons why are pretty obvious. Inhibits the production or activity of stomach acid. So same as the inhibition of saliva production, same here where it says inhibits the gallbladder, which produces bile, inhibits the small intestine, okay? These are all adaptations to make us basically not interested in digestion, and to bring as much energy and resources available from stopping doing those tasks, so that we have as much energy, okay, and resources available to deal with that fight or flight response. And it's really important to know that, because we'll get into digestion just a little bit in a few slides time, okay, but basically clients live in this sympathetic stress state all the time, and that is why they're having a lot of digestive issues. So a lot of people think they'll come to us and they go, I've got digestive issues, I bloat easily, I burp a lot, you know, maybe I have alternating constipation and or diarrhea. You'll hear all of those things so often, and they think it's a digestive system problem. They think it's something to do with the foods they're eating, intolerances or whatever. But probably 7 to 8 times out of 10, it's as simple as it's a stress problem. Because over time, when these adaptations don't just become short-term, they actually become long-term, they stay elevated all the time. Now we don't really produce saliva, okay? Now, where's my cursor? Now we don't really produce saliva. Now we have low stomach acid. Now we're not producing bile properly. Now our intestines aren't working properly. Of course, we're going to have digestive system issues if none of that stuff's working properly. But it's not working properly because we're living in this stress state, and the body's trying to redirect all available energy and resources to dealing with that fight or flight response. So let me know if that makes sense so far, okay? So a couple of other adaptations that happen here, we have the adrenal glands. They secrete adrenaline and noradrenaline, okay? And cortisol, which is left out, but cortisol as well, as you all know. Your bladder relaxes, again, just to save energy. So I'm sure we maybe all at least know stories of someone, maybe not know someone personally, but you know the stories of someone, or you see it in the movies where someone gets super nervous or scared and they wee themselves. That's why. And if you're interested, then basically orgasms and ejaculation are sympathetic responses. So yeah, the other couple that we're missing from this graph, blood pressure increases. Again, most people know that and they know why. Okay, we need to obviously get as much blood and oxygen available, okay, around the body to, again, deal with this fight or flight response. Blood sugar levels go up. It does say that one here. I just forgot to mention it. So blood sugar levels go up so that we have available glucose in the bloodstream to redirect to wherever we need it to deal with, again, that fight or flight response. So the hormone responsible for that, as I'm sure most of you know, is glucagon. So it's the opposite of insulin. It actually pulls glycogen out of the cells, okay, and puts it back in the bloodstream. So this is now a massive problem when people talk about insulin sensitivity and blood sugar dysregulation. People talk a lot about, obviously, carbohydrate intake. And yes, that matters. We all know that that influences, obviously, blood sugar levels. But stress also influences blood sugar levels, because if we are going through these periods of maybe overeating and having big spikes in our blood sugar, but then we're going through really stressful periods and maybe skipping meals and we're busy, or even if we're not really skipping meals, but we're just highly stressed, we're overtraining, okay, that puts a lot of stress on the pancreas and this whole insulin sensitivity thing, because now glucagon's having to work very hard as well to pull glycogen out of the bloodstream and put glucose and convert it into glucose and put that back in the bloodstream. So we're having these big spikes and troughs, okay, to blood sugar, which of course causes, you know, stress in itself and dysfunction, and we're going to look at that a little bit more. The other adaptation that occurs, and this one's super awesome, is our immune system upregulates. So if we get cut or we get hurt in this fight or flight response, then what basically happens is our innate immune system. So we've got 2 branches of our immune system, the adaptive and the innate. So the innate branch is basically like our first responders, okay? So we get cut, that's what starts forming the scab, okay? They're our first on the scene to start dealing with anything, viruses, pathogens, cuts, okay, physical bruises, whatever it might be. So our body actually upregulates our immune system, so that's kind of like ready and waiting for if we get hurt in this fight or flight response. Okay, does anyone have any questions so far about those adaptations? Awesome. So Is being in our sympathetic nervous system a bad thing? Is being in our fight or flight response of our nervous system a bad thing? Is cortisol a bad thing? Anyone got any thoughts or answers to that? Have a look at the chat. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a trick question. So I'm glad you said no and not yes, Elijah, because that is more of the correct of the two opportunities. But the answer is kind of it depends, because are we talking about acute or chronic? Okay, and this is kind of the problem. So no, it's not a bad thing. Okay, it is our survival response. So this is how we manage to survive so effectively and efficiently as a species. Okay. So the problem, like everything, is the dosage, okay, or the frequency. So we aren't designed to go into fight or flight often. It should be a sprint response, not a marathon. So, oh shit, there's a tiger. Okay, we've learned throughout evolution that they're not friendly. Okay, we need to run or fight. And the body moves into your sympathetic nervous system to best prepare for that. Because if I'm about to have to run from a tiger or fight it, I want my body to be as best upregulated and prepared as possible, right? But we can't live there all the time for reasons that we're going to get into. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever watched like a nature documentary and you see like a cheetah chasing a gazelle. The gazelle gets away and then 5 minutes later, it's just chilling again and it's eating. Okay, animals, most animals, there's probably exceptions to this, but most animals are significantly better at shifting back out of their stress response and then just carrying back on with their lives than we are as humans. Okay, we're really bad at actually staying in here. Something bad happens, we get angry about it. We're vocalizing that negativity for the rest of the day. We're talking shit about the person that annoyed us, like etc., etc. We overthink it, we get anxious. So animals just transition out of this stress response really quickly and easily, but humans are really, really bad at doing that. So a combination of ending up in our fight or flight mode way more often than it was originally designed for, and us being bad at shifting back out, is causing all of these chronic health problems, because all of these adaptations that occur that we went through, they all stay elevated and they don't ever have a chance to come back down. And then that leads to problems, right? Which again, we'll get into. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So the problem is we now take our mammoth or our saber-toothed tiger, pretty sure I've spelled that wrong actually, now I'm looking at it, home with us, because we live in a very different world than the one we evolved in. Credit to Luke Lerman for that kind of little sentence about how we take a saber-toothed tiger home with us. Okay, so does anyone know what the diseases are called for chronically high and chronically low cortisol? One or the other or both, or anyone know what those diseases are? Where's the chat gone? Here we go. Cool. So we've got Cushing's and Addison's disease. Okay. So the primary take home so far is that these acute pulses of cortisol, okay, and the other stress adaptations are beneficial, okay, and they're important to help our body adapt to stress over time. But when these when these levels become chronically elevated, so they stay elevated, okay, that's bad. So chronically elevated cortisol, okay, or having too little cortisol is equally as bad. So what often happens is when we have these adaptations, such as high cortisol and such as like chronically elevated immune system, is they can only stay elevated for so long. So what often happens, depending on the adaptation we're talking about, is they then crash and they become really, really low. So this often happens for people that go on holiday. They're overworking, you know, they're living in this stressed environment, they've got this stressful life. Maybe they're obviously more stressed because they're going on holiday, so they're trying to finish work. They go on holiday, and then obviously they're relaxing. So then their cortisol has a chance to come down, and more importantly, their immune system has a chance to come down. Because it's been chronically elevated for so long, we then start relaxing. we shift out of that fight or flight state and into that rest and recover state of our nervous system, which allows the immune system to come down. And it's like, oh, thank God for that. But then subsequently, we catch something that otherwise we maybe normally would have been able to have fought off, but we can't because our immune system's crashed below what would be normal. And we're also in a bit of just a generally weakened, stressed state. And subsequently, we get pretty sick. So this happens to people that, don't go on holiday as well. We all know people that have just worked so hard that they've, ended up chronically fatigued. They've got sick. They've become run down. They've become exhausted. Sometimes that happens to people before they get a chance to go on holiday. But often what happens is that change in relaxation, that coming out of the stress mode when someone goes on holiday, brings everything down, and then people often get very sick. So with Addison's disease, this is where the body no longer can mount or generate a stress response at all. And this is really bad. Sometimes people can be as bad as they can pass out just standing up because their bodies can't raise blood pressure adequately. Because it's, again, blood pressure is another adaptation that we've looked at. It becomes elevated to dealing with this response. And sometimes then it just becomes so overstressed and the body's so weak that it then can't do that anymore. So yeah, these are the two extreme ends of the spectrum, Cushing's and Addison's, okay? But just because someone does not have a medical diagnosis, just because it's not so bad that it's a disease and it's been diagnosed, okay, does not mean that there is a gray area in between where it's optimal, acceptable, not great at all, but maybe not technically a disease yet, and then diseased, okay? So the absence of a medical diagnosis does not equal health. So for many people, we basically live in fight or flight. So, let me run you through what an example normal day might be for a lot of people. They wake up to an alarm, okay? That's a stressor. They've probably woken up tired, they're hitting snooze, they don't want to get up, they're maybe not looking forward to their day ahead of them. Okay, that again is obviously a stressor to the body, it's a stressor to the mind. So maybe they're rushing around in the morning, getting ready, stuff like you can't find your keys, you're trying to get the kids ready, maybe you're eating breakfast on the go, etc., etc. Okay, you get stuck in traffic or your train's delayed, maybe you're late to work, you're not looking forward to work, maybe you've forgotten something. People are having to use multiple stimulants throughout the day. Maybe we don't like our job, or the workload is too much, the deadlines are too much, maybe we don't get on with other people in the team, that gives us anxiety, maybe we don't like our boss. Okay, we're eating maybe mindlessly at our desk through lunch, okay, you get my point kind of with people's day-to-day lives. And not only is that very stressful, but on the flip side of it, people often then aren't doing the opposite. They're often not living with a purpose. They're not doing something that fires them up and excites them. They're inside all day. They're not outside. They're not getting sunlight. They're not getting fresh air. They're not moving their body. So not only are we living in this fight or flight state of the nervous system and doing all of this stuff that's often kind of quite bad for us, but therefore by default, we're often not living a life that does the opposite as well, right? So you get my point so far, and then often they go to the gym in the evening, okay, often overtrain, often on too many stimulants. We all know that training is a stressor, right? Okay, and it needs to be. If it wasn't stressful, it wouldn't get an adaptation. The adaptation being that muscle mass, the fitness levels, whatever it is that we're chasing with the training stimulus. But we need to be careful not to overtrain, not to do too much. Okay, often finish training quite late at night, which then obviously, wires you, it drives cortisol high. Cortisol and melatonin have an opposite correlation. Often this means people then eat too close to training. Okay, that's stressful because we've already looked at how digestion can't occur in that stress response. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Also often eating late at night, which can affect sleep quality. Okay, often go to bed too late, on electronics in the evening, poor quality sleep, and the cycle repeats, right? So not only is this just back-to-back consistent stressors that are putting us in that stress response, where in the day are we breaking this up? Where in the day are you doing something to make that shift? Whether it's getting outside, walking, reading, just relaxing, hanging out with friends, breath work, yoga. We're going to look at some of those techniques more. But often for people, from the minute they wake up to the minute maybe they start watching Netflix in the evening, often there's maybe not anything that they're actively doing to try and make that shift out of the stress response. So not only are we living this overstressed, overburdened, over anxious, unhealthy lifestyle, we're not breaking the day up to stop it accumulating. Okay, does that make sense? So we need to be trying to do some stuff in our day, and we need to be getting clients to do some stuff in their day to break this up. Okay, so this is by no means a complete list, but as well as all of that stuff that we just looked at, so the day-to-day stressors / not doing the things to balance it out, okay, we also have the underlying stressors. So most clients are going to have some sort of digestive issues, whether it's just a general dysbiosis, inflammation, intestinal permeability, or whether it's something a bit more serious like Candida or SIBO. Probably taking some sort of medication, metabolic syndrome, maybe cholesterol, blood pressure, pre-diabetic or even diabetic, etc., etc. Maybe battling a virus or an illness or an injury. Maybe there's some psychological stressors, okay, etc., etc. So we need to be screening our clients for this stuff. We need to be assessing our clients for this stuff and having an idea of where all of this is at, so that we can then make informed decisions on A, trying to help them minimize the stress coming in, B, trying to help them manage and deal with the stress, and C, so that we're matching the workload we give them. And I mean that psychologically and physiologically. So I don't just mean the workload as in training volume, but I mean the workload as in how many boxes are we asking them to tick. Because if someone's bucket is absolutely overspilling, which we're going to look at in a minute, also giving them 26 boxes to tick per day is probably going to be counterproductive. So we need to make sure we really understand where the client's at. And then we're going, okay, if this person doesn't really have the psychological and physiological capabilities, time and mental bandwidth wise and overthinking wise, to add in a lot of stuff, we need to pick the low hanging fruit of what boxes we are asking them to tick. Okay, before we move on, does anyone have any questions on that? Please feel free to turn your audio on or drop me a message in the chat. Cool. Let me know if this is all making sense so far, okay? So I absolutely love this table, okay? This is from this textbook here, okay, by Thomas, PhD. And this little diagram here from that textbook has been slightly modified by Sam Miller, okay? Now, what this does is it's quite clever because it has stress as the central consideration or variable, but it works out and it works back in, which is amazing. It's a two-way street. There's overlap, okay? So that's why this diagram here is so awesome. So we're going to get into this. There's just a couple that I've added as well, okay? So there's different ways we can break down stress. Okay, the way this one's broken it down is inflammation, okay, glycemic dysregulation, perceived and emotional and psychological stress, and sleep and circadian rhythm bits, okay? And all of these affect hormone production. That's why hormones don't kind of have their own section here, is all of these can then affect hormones, right? So all I've added here is obviously viewing blue light at night and not viewing light during the day. I should write not viewing light in the day there. Obviously impacts this. And here we now know how big of an impact oral inflammation and your oral microbes, so things like bleeding gums and cavities, have on the rest of your body, which is just crazy. I mean, it's not really that crazy when you think about it. Like, obviously your teeth and mouth are connected to the rest of your body, but you know, traditional dentistry kind of views it as something different, but it's really not. So they're just the ones I've added. Now, we don't need to go through kind of all of these, but the point is to understand that, you know, we can then break stress down, and then these things have a knock-on effect, but then they can have a backwards effect as well. So, for example, if we have a gut issue, and we all kind of know how important the gut is now, right, for this knock-on effect to the rest of the body. Our gut produces a lot of neurotransmitters, in particular serotonin. So issues there can obviously then lead upstream via the vagal nerve to actually issues here with these neurotransmitter productions. So then this backwardsly works in terms of that then causes anxiety and depression, which means we're perceiving stress, right? Which therefore causes more stress. But it also works outwards. So if we are just perceiving our life to be quite negative, glass half empty, okay, then that is also going to cause anxiety and depression. And subsequently, that will have a knock-on effect to neurotransmitter production. So these things are two-way streets, okay, or cycles. And they can be really vicious cycles that can be really hard to break. So here, for example, we see obesity, and that's kind of half and half. Obviously, it can be caused or influenced by inflammation and blood sugar dysregulation. Obesity can be directly affected by both of these and indirectly via cravings, increased appetite, needing to eat more sugar to get the same dopamine response, etc., etc. So again, it's a two-way street. So directly and indirectly, this can affect obesity. But then obesity in itself is stressful, hence why I've drawn on these extra arrows to really highlight that. Because most probably, not definitely, but most probably, your perceived stress, your anxiety, etc., etc., are going to be impaired, are going to be worse if you're obese, right? But also, literally directly, body fat is pro-inflammatory. So having the more body fat we have, the more inflammatory signals that sends back to the hypothalamus, which therefore causes more stress. So without kind of wanting to overcomplicate it and focus on the exact mechanisms and pathways, because that's kind of not the point. The point is we've got this client coming in, and in all of the ways we can look at break down stress, often they're very high. Then when we subcategorize it into these areas in terms of like their health, and how it's a two-way street, these clients are often in a lot of vicious cycles. They eat a really crappy meal. You know, that meal in itself is therefore stressful in the sense that it maybe has a toxic burden and it's pro-inflammatory and it's acidic. So that meal has a stressful response to the body, okay? But then also, it may be, once it's left the digestive system, it then affects blood sugar levels. So now all of this feedback from that stress response from eating the meal to the brain, okay, is causing stress. That maybe makes us obviously go away, overeat, make worse food choices, maybe we gain body fat. So those are just a few examples of how this stuff works inwards and outwards. It works up and downstream. It works in a cycle, however you kind of want to view it. So hopefully that kind of makes sense and helps us to have this mindset shift on what stress is and how we need to kind of get in here and help clients with their perception of stress and mindset. We need to help clients optimize their sleep. We need to minimize inflammation / maximize anti-inflammation strategies. We need to maximize everything around their blood sugar response, okay, to the meals that they're eating. This will indirectly improve hormones. This will indirectly improve digestion. This will indirectly improve liver health. This will indirectly improve thyroid health. And then we start to have this knock-on effect upstream, downstream, across, etc., right? So this is why on that very first slide I said it's not about the macros, because none of this stuff is really about the macros. Okay, yes, if you eat 400 grams of sugar a day, it's about the macros, but generally speaking, the second a client starts working with us, we're kind of getting them on a balanced approach, you know, fats, carbs, proteins. Okay, so it's not really about the macros. When we're having these like clients and they're not responding to the plan, they're having health issues, they're not making the progress that we think they should be, it's not about the macros, okay? Indirectly, this stuff can affect how the body utilizes macros, yes. Indirectly, it can affect the type of food choices you want to make, yes. But it's not directly about your carb, fat, and macro breakdown and ratio and choices that we can then facilitate by giving a client guidelines or giving a client a meal plan. None of this stuff is really to do with necessarily the meal plan or the macros, okay? But if we're not addressing all of this stuff, we're going to have all of these issues out here. So that's a kind of really hopefully hit home on the first two presentations. This is where and why coaching needs to be so much more than a training program, macros, and a meal plan, because none of that really, although it does a little bit, but none of that really tackles the root cause of these problems. Anyone have any questions on that? Okay, so let's quickly look at the general adaptation syndrome. Now, this is a little bit oversimplified because obviously, depending on the stimulus or stressor that we're talking about, there's a lot of crossover, and I don't want to repeat myself, we just kind of went over that, but looking at it at a pretty simple level, we input a stressor, for example, a training stimulus. We all know that that causes fatigue. We then start to recover. We get back to baseline and the supercompensation occurs, which is then, of course, you know, the improved muscle mass, the improved fitness levels. It depends on what the training stimulus is, right? So if I go onto this page, so what happens when the stimulus is input already below homeostasis? So if this is homeostasis, this is our baseline here, okay? What happens if the training stimulus comes in here before we've recovered from the last workout, okay? Or same kind of question, but looking at it forwards instead of backwards. What happens when we add a stimulus before that supercompensation has occurred? Or if we've even finished recovering? So this is something we all have a basic understanding of. You know, we don't do legs 2 days in a row or even full body workouts 2 days in a row. But we still need to be looking at our program design and the crossover in terms of lower back loading, joints and ligaments, and general nervous system fatigue. We need to be considering that with our program design. But then also to look at this just beyond the training stimulus, okay? What is someone's recovery capabilities like? Because if their nutrition, their sleep, their stress management, and if they've got a lot of stress on their body already from digestive issues, from blood sugar dysregulation, all that stuff that we just looked at, they're going to have a real hard time recovering. So from here to here, this might be 1 day for one person, but it might be 3 days for another person. So if we don't have an understanding of where our clients are at with their recovery capabilities, okay, which is a broad term and a lot of moving factors, I know, but if we don't have an idea of where they're at with that, we then can't make an informed decision in terms of our training programming. And we also can't help to influence, optimize, and manage their recovery if we don't know where they're at with it. So we need to have an idea, obviously, of where they're at, / a plan in place, / things that we are measuring and managing for their nutrition, sleep, stress, digestion, inflammation, etc., etc. Okay. So it's the same thing here. If this wasn't a training stimulus, but if this was a stressor from a cold, the supercompensation is an improved adaptive immune response. So as I said earlier already, we have two branches of the immune system, okay? Innate, which is those first responders, that never changes, okay? It's not adaptive. They always tackle anything that your immune system needs to tackle. The first branch, the innate branch, always tackles and deals with it the same way, okay? That's how they can get there so quickly. Our adaptive immune response is adaptive. It learns, it gets used to things based on the last time it dealt with them, and it adapts. And then that's our slightly more long-term branch of the immune system, okay? So this here is just the same model, but showing it with a different stimulus and a different supercompensation. So we need to be finding out how many other stressors are your clients recovering from daily, okay? So that's, you know, day-to-day stuff. But also how many underlying stressors are they fighting? And how good is your recovery or your client's recovery? So when we look at the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, like there is a switch, okay? Remember that they are branches of the autonomic nervous system. So we don't have to voluntarily make this switch happen, right? It happens automatically. Our blood pressure goes up, our heart rate goes up, etc., etc. Pardon me. We don't have to tell and make our body to do that, right? We all know that. So there is a switch, but there's also a continuum. So if you haven't already grabbed any little pictures for Insta stories, then feel free to on this one, because I think this is kind of cool. Obviously, I would say that because I did it in Canva. So what this is basically showing, as you can see here with the emojis, is we kind of have like a little bit stressed, a little bit anxious, a little bit sad, okay? Sympathetic nervous system response, but then again, it's a continuum. So if this is like a near-death experience or the most traumatic experience ever, there's a continuum, okay? So your heart rate might not go up as much, your cortisol might not go up as much when you have an argument than if you have a car crash, right? For example, touch wood, that will never happen for you. Same thing with our parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, if this is the most relaxed you've ever been. So for example, when you're doing Project Elevate and you just feel the stress melt away because all of a sudden you feel empowered and on track and you feel good about where you're at in your business, okay? Or yoga or breath work, whatever your thing is that's made you feel the most relaxed. So it's a continuum. And for me, because no one ever really explained it to me like this for years, it was always, it's a switch. And I was like, it never kind of made sense, because I'm like, it makes sense that it's a switch, but one stress response is not the same as obviously another stress response, depending on A, the stressor that we're talking about, and B, obviously the severity of the stressor. And there's times where I've been relaxed, but then there's been times where I've done mushrooms and I've been very relaxed. Okay, so it kind of made sense to me that it was a continuum, but no one ever really explained it to me like that. So I hopefully that this kind of graph here will help this to kind of sink in more, right? So we always see this line, and then there's a list of the adaptations either side, and it's like a switch. Which one are you in? Yes, there's a switch. Okay, which side are you in? But there's also a continuum. So again, this is the same slide from Monday. So down here, we kind of have obviously stress, and we can even put stress one underneath all of this. Okay, and then we can even obviously put stress in the middle and build the rest of this out, as we've already done, okay, with that a few slides ago. But the point here is that, you know, when we're trying to start with a client, you know, healing their hormones, fixing their health problems, whatever it is, if we're not addressing stress, nutrition, and sleep, nothing upstream works anyway, just like we kind of looked at Monday. So those key concepts again, survival takes priority over reproduction, okay? But because there is a lot more to the sex hormones than just reproduction, this is why we need to care about them, even if the client doesn't care about reproduction itself. Now, you can save a good few thousand calories per menstrual cycle by not having a menstrual cycle, basically. So in times of chronic stress, low calories, malnutrition, that's why we lose the menstrual cycle. It saves you the calories having to actually grow that endometrial lining, but also it means you don't have to deal with trying to actually grow a baby, which of course is stressful and requires, you know, nutrients and materials. The body is constantly adapting to its environment. A stressed environment will result in the adaptation accordingly. And by environment, physical and mental environments, internal and external. Okay, so everything basically. And again, all stress is stress. Okay, before we get into the stress bucket analogy, does anyone have any questions? Okay, so I think this is a really nice way of explaining it, like for you to make sense, but also this is how I explain it with clients, because you will have a problem sometimes getting clients to kind of buy into this concept that maybe they're overstressed and maybe they need to do more things for themselves, because they either just don't believe that and or, you know, they're a mum or they own a business or both, and they're putting themselves last and they think that's how it needs to be. So subsequently, that can make a lot of this stuff from an implementation standpoint very challenging. So I really like this, okay? This is known as the stress bucket. So yeah, I kind of walk clients through this and explain this to them, ideally on a call, so subsequently I can make it personalized and talk to them where they're at in terms of these moving parts, okay? So number one is the total stress coming into your life, okay? You all know that that's now known as allostatic load. And then of course we have all of those subcategories. And I just explain that to clients, it's total stress. If they go, oh, I'm not stressed from a lifestyle standpoint, okay, cool. But you've got X, Y, and Z other stressors, okay? So that is how much is entering your bucket, okay? Allostatic load. So how are we screening and assessing how much stress the client is dealing with? How are we screening and assessing where the client is at with allostatic load? Now, because it's such a broad term and it's a moving term, there is no like number that we can calculate, and that's not the point. It doesn't necessarily need to be a fixed number or a calculation or a formula, but we need some sort of metrics that we're collecting and assessing for allostatic load. Okay, what are we doing to try and help them reduce it? Okay, how are we measuring those improvements over time? And are we adding the appropriate amount of stressors to this? So if someone has a very unhealthy relationship with food, if they're very obsessive, okay, and we give them maybe like a very precise meal plan, that might be adding a lot of stress to them, okay? In terms of physical stress, we probably don't need to be giving 16 sets of legs twice a week to Karen who's 42. Or maybe we do, you know, I don't know, but the point is to open your mind up to these concepts, because a lot of the time I see coaches give their clients basically bodybuilding diets and bodybuilding routines. And not only are they often unhealthy from a psychological and a physiological standpoint, because they often create micronutrient deficiencies where they're not varied enough, they're also just not appropriate in terms of matching the client where the client's at in comparison to the amount of allostatic load. So with some of this stuff, it's subjective and some of it's non-subjective. So, you know, blood work and measuring certain markers that we're going to get to, that's non-subjective. It is what it is, and that's great. How stressed are you today on a scale of 1 to 7? That's subjective, okay? Both are great. So the bucket is your ability to handle stress and recover, basically. So what are we doing to make the client's buckets bigger? So sleep is always going to be the biggest thing here, okay? Closely followed by nutrition and hydration. And then some more specific stuff we can do is things like meditation, breath work, and practicing gratitude and vocalizing positivity, cold showers, grounding. So the biggest problem that I see and most people have with doing this stuff here is they expect to feel different from doing it. And yes, it can help instantly improve your stress response. Yes, which is then part 3, it's the tap. It isn't necessarily the goal. The goal is actually with an accumulation over time to make your bucket bigger so that your default settings are like more relaxed. And so that when a stressor does come in, it doesn't get as much of a response, okay? So the benefit of cold showers, gratitude, journaling, grounding, breathwork, meditation, yes, they should instantly make us feel a little bit better, but really we need an accumulation of practicing them over time to make our bucket bigger. And explaining it like that to clients can be really powerful to actually get that buy-in and consistency of them doing it. So what are we doing to make the clients' buckets bigger? And one thing I actually haven't written on here, which is arguably the biggest and most important thing, or a very close second to sleep, is downtime. Time where you're by yourself and or with friends, where you're not working, you're not being a mum, you're not being a business owner, you're not on social media, you're not available, you're unplugging and you're just having fun. I'm sure I have written that somewhere, but if I haven't written it here, I don't know where I would have wrote that, but I remember writing it, but that's, yeah, here, okay, yeah, here. So this obviously helps with the emptying as well, unplugging from work and social media, but it also makes our bucket bigger, because if we've had a really stressful week at work, by Friday, if we spent all weekend away from work the week before, relaxing and unplugging and unwinding, and we know we get to do that the same again on the weekend coming up, we'll feel much better, much more relaxed about everything that just happened in our week that was maybe stressful, than if we'd worked through the weekend and we were about to do it again, right? That perception of the environment is now very, very different. So unplugging from work, having boundaries, getting off social media, spending time with friends, super important for making your bucket bigger and for increasing the flow off the tap. So what are we doing to increase the size of the client's taps or make the tap flow more, okay? And are we matching and adapting the stresses that we give the clients such as training volume and frequency, etc., to all of this. So the goal is to basically, obviously, have this, not this. So here there's more stress coming in, the bucket's smaller, we're overspilling, and the tap is not flowing as much, okay? So these are the types of questions we need to be asking, how we're measuring it, managing it, okay? Are we matching it? So for example, taking deload weeks when they need a deload week, having a diet break when they need a diet break, taking a week off tracking when they need to take a week off tracking. Or the opposite, are we making them overreach on purpose for 5 days leading up to a holiday if they want to do that and they can do that? And you know, if a client says, yeah, I'm going to a different job next week, or I've got a different commute next week, I'm up an hour earlier, so I'm going to lose an hour's more sleep. And we need to be aware of that they're probably going to come into our session, or if we're training them online, you know, the workouts themselves, they're going to be coming in having less sleep and higher stress. So we need to be aware of that. We need to consider that, right? And again, this is things that makes coaching to optimize the results and the service for the client, but also it's the stuff that the £20 a month apps can't do. Okay, before we move on, does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, Leo?
Yes, mate.
Yeah, so obviously we know sleep is vital and most important. But so regarding, so if you have a client I've got a client that has basically 2 kids and in and out the night, constantly broken sleep. Is there a way you would go about that to, obviously that can't obviously be a priority, well, it's a priority, but it's hard to obviously fix that because the kids is kind of out of their hands to get a fixed sleep. Like some nights it's good, some nights it's not so good. Is there a way how you would personally go about that to reduce the stress in other ways, or?
Great question, mate. Great question. So, and the reason I love that question is, and actually, I'm genuinely really glad you said that, because that would have been a really great slide to have done an example case study on that I should have done. So thank you for asking that, mate. That's a great question, actually, because whether it's work calling you in the middle of the night because that's your job, or whether it's a puppy waking you up, they're all the same in the sense that often people will say, I have zero control over that, it is what it is, and subsequently I can't do anything about it, and then they just kind of forget about it. And that's not untrue, right? We can't, obviously, you know, the client can't not wake up to go and deal with their kids. But what it means is that because it's such a large stressor and they can't directly do anything about it, we need to be very aware of it in terms of the stress that we're giving them and adding in, because they're going to have, you know, this is basically going to be pouring in for them because they're going to be sleep deprived. All of the subsequent consequences that has, okay, it affects mood, it affects performance, it affects hormone production, it affects cognitive function and ability and memory. It affects everything, right? We all know that sleep deprivation affects everything. So for this person, they're going to have a lot of stress coming into their life, a lot of allostatic load. And their ability to deal with it is not going to be very good, because double-edged sword, guess what? They're tired. Does that part make sense so far, Lige? I'll take that as a yes.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Cool. So we then kind of need to explain that to them. And part one of this answer is match their expectations accordingly. So this is not the type of client, I don't know if this is like their expectations, but if it is, then this is not the type of client that's going to be able to do some sort of extreme transformation. It's just not. So we need to align their expectations and their goals accordingly. There was a fantastic metabolic ward study, which means they were living in the lab. They had 2 groups of people, same training program, same percentage calorie deficit, same macro split, all relative to them. The only difference was that one group had 7.5 hours of sleep and one group had 5.5. Now, at the end of, it was only a short study, 2 or 3 weeks, because metabolic ward studies always are, the weight loss was the same between groups. That would make sense, right? The deficit was the same. Yeah, weight loss was the same. But the group that only got 5.5 hours of sleep lost mostly muscle and a little body fat. The group that got 7.5 hours of sleep lost mostly body fat and only a little bit of muscle mass. And that would have happened directly and indirectly via hormones, via inflammation, via the energy you can bring to the training session. via the energy you've got to recover from the training session, right? It happens via a lot of mechanisms. So if we've got someone that wants to go on a diet, they've got, you know, a transformation type goal, and they want it to be quite extreme and quite rapid. If they're not sleeping, all we're doing is setting them up to fail by making them lose a bunch of muscle mass as well as body fat in that deficit, because they don't have the sleep to support what we're doing, to support all of these stages of the stress bucket. So it's super important to be aware of that and manage expectations and goals accordingly. You know, if possible, you would definitely be in the smallest calorie deficit possible, and maybe even only a few days a week. So with a client like that, I might have like 4 or 5 days a week in a deficit and 2 or 3 days a week at maintenance, and a smaller deficit. So yes, they'll make much slower progress, but obviously those calories being a unit of energy, it means we've got more energy coming in. And obviously it's a protective mechanism to try and minimize that potential muscle loss, because they've got more calories to support the recovery process. So I would definitely be doing that. In terms of the rest of this, you need to be explaining to them that everything I've basically just explained, and going, where else can we offset the rest of this to try and offset that? Like, what here can we reduce or improve to offset the fact that you are in such a suboptimal situation, is part one. Then part two, because that is probably going to be overspilling their bucket, we need to be doing as much of this stuff as possible, and of course as much of this stuff as possible, to try and offset that and balance it out, right? In terms of the sleep itself, like what I know a lot of parents do, which I always used to think sounded pretty extreme, but now I really obviously understand how of a great idea I actually think this is. And that's that they will often, you know, sleep in different rooms, or even like 1 or 2 nights a week, go and sleep somewhere else so that they can actually get a complete night's sleep. And then obviously the other parent deals with it for like those 1 or 2 nights, because the difference between being sleep deprived absolutely every single night, just back to back for like literally a couple of years, you know, I have a female client, it gave her a mental breakdown. A lot of mums end up in postnatal depression. So it's serious, really serious stuff. So it may not be of an idea that they thought of before. It may be an idea that sounds so selfish they wouldn't ever really consider it. But we need to be potentially getting them to consider, you know, sleeping in different rooms, or even actually going away, and if possible, like each parent spending just 1 night a week away, if possible, to actually get a good proper night's sleep, because that will stop some of the accumulative negative consequences of this building up if you can nip it in the bud with 1 or 2 good nights sleep a week. You can't ever really technically catch up on lost sleep, but it's definitely better to have 2 nights a week where you are sleeping perfectly than obviously 0, right? You know, obviously something's always better than nothing. And then the sleep that they are getting needs to be absolutely maximized. So everything under this large umbrella of maximizing sleep quality, which starts with viewing sunlight in the day, you know, includes obviously not having caffeine too late. It includes, you know, not being on electronics right up until bed, using blue light blocking glasses, like etc., all of that stuff under that very broad umbrella of sleep quality and sleep hygiene, that needs to be maximized to try and get the best quality sleep possible when they are sleeping. So in this situation, I would usually try and use Dr. Dean's Sleep Stack, potentially some other supplements, and potentially CBD, and just really hammering home the importance of sleep hygiene. So, you know, trying to be asleep as early as possible so that they're getting as much sleep as possible before the kids wake up in the night. Yeah, not on electronics, etc., etc. I think everyone's pretty aware of like what good sleep hygiene is and what good sleep habits are now. Like a lot of great coaches in the industry have done a good job of highlighting the importance of sleep the last few years. And so we all kind of know, you know, don't be on electronics before bed, don't eat right before bed, etc., etc. So yes, mate, and then just, you need to be very adaptive and auto-regulative in your approach with training. So, you know, you've got the training program laid out, awesome, but periodization only really works for athletes, and even athletes have variations and fluctuations in their stress and lifestyle. But for mums, it often doesn't really work. They might turn up for a session and they've not slept well that night. Well, we're potentially going to have, or definitely going to have, decreased coordination and like just motor neuron control. So more complex movements like squats, deadlifts, jumps might not be ideal, but definitely won't be ideal in comparison to machines or more isolation movements and less complex movements. So just make sure you're asking those questions. Hey, how have you slept? How is your sleep quality? And then you're changing and auto-regulating the session ahead of you accordingly. So basically, this here, the allostatic load, you play a part in that because training's a stressor, right? So if this is massive because they've not slept, we need to try and offset that by minimizing the training stress. Does that make sense, mate?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so perception of stress matters massively. For any of you that follow like Dr. Joe Dispenza, however you pronounce his second name, he's doing some absolutely crazy research on how your perception can change your reality. But I think most of you now know, and it's quite widely accepted, your mind can't tell the difference between an imagined situation and a past memory. If you think about it enough, your mind can't tell the difference. So perception is massive. So we've kind of got that, everyone's heard of it, glass half full, glass half empty. So what we need to be doing as coaches is constantly getting clients to frame their bad weeks with nutrition, their bad workouts, their bad rate of progress. We need to be getting clients to reframe those. They're not bad. You're doing well. Okay? We need to force them to reflect on them. Look at what positives can we take? What progress have you made? Okay? That is essential, because otherwise we've got someone with an already very high allostatic load. There's already a lot of stress coming in, and then their perception of it all is negative. Oh, I'm not doing very well. Oh, I don't look very good. I'm not making progress. Oh, I've had a bad week. So it's our job as a coach to basically coach this mindset shift. Okay, so we're picking up on their language. Okay, we're not interrupting them literally, but we're interrupting what they're trying to tell us when they're like, oh, I've been bad, and going, you haven't been bad. Look at this, look at that. What positives can you take? What have you done well? Look at how good this week was in comparison to the week before you started working with me. Okay, so super, super important and powerful to always remember that at the forefront of our coaching. Okay, so back to the physiological, same slide from the other day. So all of the mechanisms, or most of the mechanisms of which stress impacts thyroid, right? So here we have the HPA axis, here we have the HPT axis. So as I'm sure you all remember, all of the endocrine system axes start with the hypothalamus, okay? And then here in the middle, you can see stress. So this is external coming in, so lifestyle, mindset, perception stuff coming in, and internal stuff coming up to the hypothalamus. Yeah, so we've got stress here. So again, as we saw in one of those first slides, the hypothalamus is the link between the endocrine system and the nervous system. And then, as I'm sure you will remember, with all of our axes, the hypothalamus goes to the pituitary, okay, and then the pituitary goes to whatever organ it is we're talking about. You've got the hypothalamic hormones, which go from the hypothalamus to the pituitary, okay, CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, thyroid releasing hormone, and then we've got the pituitary hormones that go from the pituitary gland to whatever organ we're talking about. So on this axis, we've got adrenochromotropin releasing, or not releasing, sorry, just hormone, and thyroid stimulating hormone. And again, remember that the hypothalamic hormone and the pituitary hormone is different depending on what axis we're talking about. So here you can see for the adrenal axis, they are of course different than they are for the thyroid axis. So we have inhibition to the thyroid signal itself. So before we even get to thyroid, just the signal that the pituitary sends, okay, we have inhibition by speaking from the hypothalamus on this side, okay? So if this is high, it inhibits thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, and it does that, of course, because survival takes preference over, metabolism. Okay, adaptation occurs. Again, here we have inhibition, and then, of course, actually from cortisol itself, we have inhibition not only to thyroid stimulating hormone, but directly to T4 inactive thyroid to T3 conversion. Okay, so these are the thyroid and adrenal axes together. And of course, we can then see how that inhibition occurs. You can also use this to obviously see the adaptogenic herbs, which can be used for the various stages of regulating this. Now, a lot of people talk a lot about adaptogens, but if everything else that we've just looked at isn't in order, then adaptogenic herbs aren't going to touch the sides. But 2 to 4 adaptogenic herbs for each of these different stages of the HPA axis can be very beneficial in people that A, really need them, B, are nailing everything else as best they can, and C, of course, have the money. And then here we can just see what nutrients are needed for TSH production itself, T4 production, and T4 to T3 conversion. Okay, let's quickly talk about stress and hunger. That's obviously adherence to nutrition is everything when we're working with clients, right? So short-term hunger in this stress response is low because fight or flight takes priority over eating and digesting food. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Hopefully makes sense to everyone. Although when the initial stressor is over, dealing with that stress, okay, for example, an argument or a breakup or just a stressful day, often results in people obviously using comfort foods. And typically these are obviously calorie dense, not nutrient dense, and they typically overeat on them, resulting in obviously a stressful environment in terms of poor quality foods, and of course a calorie surplus. But this is more psychologically driven. It's not hunger driven when it comes to comfort eating, okay? Well, I'm just putting it on here anyway. But when we look long term, when we look chronically, okay, we now have the opposite effect. So as we've just looked at, active thyroid is reduced, we become resistant to insulin and leptin, meaning we need more to get the job done, and those pathways become dysfunctional, okay? And that means that we often want and crave more of these high sugar, high fat combo foods, and we need more of them to actually feel satisfied and get that dopamine response. Sugar also short-term reduces cortisol levels, okay? Because of course, short-term consuming sugar is beneficial from a survival standpoint. It's giving us instantly available energy, which is a good thing. Again, thinking it back to being hunter-gatherers. Okay, so then this decreases that initial feeling of stress, but it means that people obviously then end up relying on sugar and comfort foods to actually deal with these stressful situations as we're talking about up here, because of the short-term actual reduction in cortisol. And of course, over time, this leads to a very vicious cycle of stress eating, comfort foods, needing more foods to feel full, satisfied, needing more foods to feel stimulated and get that dopamine response. So it's important that we have a multifaceted and multifactorial approach to tackling this and dealing with this with clients. It's not just about macros. We need to address the stress, the mindset, the inflammation, etc., etc. So hopefully now you're all understanding this much bigger picture of coaching clients. So just to talk about one specific strategy quickly, because it's arguably the most important strategy we can use, because it works via various pathways, and that is grounding or earthing. So getting barefoot in nature, okay, has a massive benefit to our blood work, to our immune system, and to our inflammatory markers. So directly, okay, it's actually super beneficial for inflammation and autoimmune diseases via, working with our immune system, but also indirectly via breathing, being out in nature, maybe being off our phone, probably walking and moving if we're barefoot in nature. So directly and indirectly via various mechanisms and pathways, grounding is actually super, super powerful. And if you'd like to read this research review paper, then the link is here. Remember that the slides will be uploaded into the Google Drive. Okay, does anyone have any questions so far? Last 5 to 10 minutes. So tracking tools, first thing AM fasted, we have heart rate variability, blood pressure, and blood sugar levels. Okay, now these things aren't going to be influenced by nutrition or cardio, okay, because we've just woken up, right? They'll minimally be influenced by what we've done the day before. But what they're going to be mostly influenced by is, are we in that stress response state of our nervous system? Because as we've looked at already, all of these are adaptations that go up, or heart rate variability actually goes down, but the other three go up to deal with being in the sympathetic nervous system, right? We're all familiar with that now, we all understand that. So if we measure these first thing in the morning, we can literally measure if our sleep quality is good, / if our stress management is good, and we're getting good restful sleep where we're shifting into rest and recover, or if we are not. Okay, so with heart rate, the trends over time and the movement in the right direction is most important, but really we should be in the 50s or even 40s. Okay, heart rate variability. So this is the variability between beats. So we actually want the variability between beats to be high. That shows we are relaxed. So if your heart beats 60 times in 1 minute, for the sake of easy maths, it does not beat every second on the second. There is variability in the heart rate. So the lower the variability, the worse. Okay, not worse because, again, it's a survival mechanism. It's not a bad thing, but it shows we're in that stress state. So we actually want heart rate variability to be high, probably the 70 to 80s. But again, trends over time and correlation with other markers really matter. You can measure heart rate variability using any heart rate monitor device and linking it with the Elite HRV app. Now, HRV by itself doesn't tell us too much because we're still kind of understanding a lot about it. And also one heart rate variability app and one tracking device, like one monitor versus a watch, they can give you really different numbers. So one person might have a heart rate variability in the 70s and another person might be in the 50s, but you can't ever directly compare them if they're using different apps, different devices, okay? Blood pressure, the gold standard is 115/75, okay? And blood sugar levels, fasting blood sugar levels, 4.5 to 5.5, or even some people will say 4 to 5.5. And then of course we have subjective, okay? So every day on my daily rituals check-in sheet with clients, they just give me a 1 to 7 score on these things. And of course, there's other stuff as well, such as, are you waking up in the night? Did you pass your stools today? There's other feedback that the body gives us daily, which of course, you know, can be used to track and measure this stuff as well. There was a lot more of that in Monday's presentation, so I'm not going to go too much into more of that now, okay? So little tip on this equipment required for this. Now, if you're a one-on-one PT, what I would recommend doing, and what I did, okay, because you're not going to get clients to buy a heart rate monitor, blood pressure kit, and a blood sugar kit, is I bought them. Obviously, I use it for myself, but whenever I sign up a new client, I would give them my heart rate monitor, blood pressure kit, and blood sugar little kit, and I'd make them take these readings for like 3 or 4 days in a row. This obviously means that, you know, they've got to do it. There's no excuse. I don't have to buy anything, okay? So it means we're going to get these initial numbers. Now, not only is this brilliant because it means we can see them improve, which is fantastic, okay? It helps us get a buy-in. So often the client will say to us, nah, I'm not stressed. And then you're kind of just going back and forwards, like maybe arguing if they are or not. There's no argument with the numbers. You know, if their waking heart rate is in the 70s, if their heart rate variability is in the 50s, if their blood pressure is 135/90, if their fasting blood sugar levels are at 6.5, they can't argue with the numbers. And then I would cycle around, so every month my clients would have them for maybe 1, 2, 3 days again every month, and we would do a monthly review. Okay, so I'd highly recommend that. In terms of online, if you don't have the luxury to do that, a blood sugar kit is very cheap. Okay, and heart rate monitors are not too bad. You get a good one for £50. I would recommend trying to get clients to grab at least one of them. The heart rate monitor can obviously be great as well for periodizing cardio and conditioning protocols. So it's kind of, you know, there's beneficial in multiple ways. But having one of these markers can be great so that we have a starting point and so that we have obviously something to correlate against. So if it starts getting worse, we can obviously adapt training to it. We can let the client know, like, hey, your numbers are getting worse. Like, they'll be like, oh yeah, I've been really stressed at work recently. Okay, cool. Now we can have a conversation with them about stress management techniques that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do if they weren't giving us this data. Okay. Yeah. Anyone got any questions on these tracking tools or the methods or anything like that? Any questions? Any questions? So I had a client once, right, a while back. Like many people, he thought, you know, I don't eat too badly, and I got him to start tracking his fasting blood sugar levels. And, you know, it really highlighted for him actually how bad his nutrition was and how many carbs he was having the day before, which he just kind of wasn't aware of, which do influence your fasting reading, but also how bad his sleep was and how stressed he was, which is what mostly influences that fasting reading. But if he wasn't taking those numbers, it wouldn't really facilitate having those conversations in a specific, personalized way. Instead of talking in generalized terms, we're literally talking about your exact numbers, which of course massively improves buy-in, consistency, and adherence. So the blood pressure cuff, Elijah, would probably be the least important one because it's also the most expensive and you can only do one thing with it. With a heart rate monitor, you've got waking heart rate, you've got heart rate variability, you can use it for cardio. So that's obviously awesome, okay? If they can't afford that, or if you think that the blood sugar kit would be more important because maybe they, you know, are very overweight and or their doctors told them that they have high blood sugar levels, or something like PCOS, where that's potentially going to be more of a consideration, then you might get the blood sugar kit instead, but that's only like £10, so it's pretty cheap. So hopefully they might be able to get a heart rate monitor and a blood sugar kit. Now with the blood sugar kit, obviously you can use it post-meal as well. So you can take your levels before you eat and then 30, 60, 90 and 120 minutes afterwards, and we can plug obviously that glucose response. And obviously that allows us to see what our insulin sensitivity is like, if we're, you know, actually getting a good response to that meal, managing that meal or not. So typically heart rate monitor, maybe blood sugar kit first, but typically heart rate monitor, then the blood sugar kit, and then blood pressure cuff. So this is a different client. Okay, this is her chronometer. Chronometer is significantly better than MyFitnessPal. Here you can see her waking heart rate is 85. Now a Fitbit, of course, is not 100% accurate, but it is what it is. It gives us some numbers, it gives us some data, right? 85, super high. If she wasn't doing that, it wouldn't allow me to then have this conversation with her, okay? So overnight, we got her heart rate down to 74, even though she's actually had like, you know, she's had less sleep, but her heart rate's down by 11 beats overnight, okay? And what we did, okay, was we had clear boundaries and a routine for work, finishing her evening starting, okay? And then she created a little routine with herself, which means she's done, which was filling in her daily rituals check-in sheet, filling in her chronometer, and then getting off electronics. Doing a brain dump for the day with ideas and thoughts and to-do list for tomorrow, and then some kind of, you know, some journaling stuff and some gratitude stuff as well, okay? Off electronics, having a bath, and 85 to 74. So not only is this obviously massive in terms of adding value as a coach, okay, it's obviously massive in terms of improving our health. So the point here is kind of twofold. Ideally, we want some data to work with, because the more data we have as a coach, the more value we can kind of add, because the more stuff we can implement and we can talk to clients about. But also the second point is just the power of doing this stuff on optimizing stress and sleep quality and subsequently your stress response, okay? Moving on. All right, so quick summary. Most clients have a high allostatic load. Most clients don't get out of their sympathetic nervous system much, if at all, throughout the day. So we need to break that day up. Most clients need a heavier focus on health, healing, sleep quality, and stress management than they are giving themselves and we are giving them. We need to match what we ask of a client with everything else entering their bucket. We need to implement strategies to increase the bucket and the tap. And remember, you can't manage what you don't measure. Ask more questions, do more screening, collect more data, have more conversations. Okay, the homework's nothing new, it's just the same from Monday's session. So hopefully this will help you make a lot more sense of Monday's lecture, but also helps you obviously implement it and action it with clients, which will of course subsequently, improve your ability to technically get the homework done. So remember, print screen / photos of your notes from the homework, and print screens and photos of your check-in sheet that's in the Google Drive. Okay, that is our weekly check-in process every Sunday in the group, so that we can hold each other accountable. Okay, so I'm going to leave this slide here for a second. So if anyone hasn't grabbed an Insta story and wants, oh, that's not what I wanted, and wants to, then obviously there's some prettier slides. Okay, Q&A, please turn your audio on, people, and or drop questions in the chat. Please tell me one thing that you've got from this, one thing that you're going to action, one thing you've learned, and or a question that you've got. And if you haven't already, please, please, please feel free to picture the screen and Insta story it. Thank you so, so much. Elijah, what have you learned? What questions have you got? What are you thinking?
Well, what I've learned is a lot, if I'm honest, mate. As always, yeah. Like you say, it's stuff which obviously, well, some of it which you kind of know, but it's the depth in, like, sort of to do with the cortisol and more in detail about that, to be honest, mate. It's something which I had a brief understanding of, but definitely not the actually depth regarding, the sympathetic states and, how much effect it really has. So that's what I've learned, and that's something which I'm definitely, again, on my priority list of learning more about, because it's really interested me. And then, going to make sure I get every single client. Already do a lot of them regarding heart rate, etc., but more, like you said, more questions. I think that's definitely something which I lack regarding conversation, especially as in person. I find sometimes, obviously, you don't want to spend your session talking about stuff which you do, like regarding the online side of things. So it's the case of, creating more like presentations, what you discussed on Monday, like simple, quick, don't have to be too long. And then, more discussions, more screenings, just prioritizing more of this, because it's just going to give clients more of an understanding as well, and more straightforward, like you say, with the answers, and more realistic, especially with the stress and the impact, like we had, like you explained to me with my current client that struggles to sleep, because his wife's also looking to start up, so that's going to be on our next conversation, obviously, join in, which is kind of good that they're both coaching together, so it should work hand in hand.
Yeah, awesome, mate. Perfect. So as we spoke about before, and I think this is a really valid point to mention quickly, in terms of the implementation of working with a client, for everyone listening, I think it's important to kind of, because when you're training people one-on-one, it's hard to have these conversations, because obviously, the goal is training, and, you're not sitting down and looking at numbers and data and stuff. So it can be hard if you're training people one-on-one to kind of manage this stuff, work on this stuff. So you need to have an online coaching component to your one-on-one business, and that is where all of this stuff is taken care of. So, even if you train with me in person 3 times a week, you still have a daily rituals check-in form in our shared Google Drive. You still complete the check-in sheet weekly. Like, I still look at your food diary. So we're still collecting all of this subjective and non-subjective data around nutrition, stress, health, steps, hydration, etc. And then every week, what I do is I just open all of that up. So I've got our Google Drive open, I've got our food diary open, and my chronometer, food diary open. I've got any of their other feedback and questions on WhatsApp web or the email open. And then I do a screen record, usually a screen record, but not always, 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes more, kind of, going through it. And that's where you help clients with this stuff. And then put time in your diary every Monday, every Tuesday, maybe even every Wednesday as well, depending on how busy you are with one-on-ones, to do this stuff for one-on-one clients as well, and then just on WhatsApp web, just copy and paste the link from Loom and send it to them, so that you are having a system in place to manage and measure and adapt all of this stuff outside of the one-on-one sessions. Because again, this is what's going to set you apart from other one-on-one PTs. This is what's going to allow you to add a lot more value to your clients. This is what's going to allow you to get really good results with your clients. This is what's going to allow you to get better retention, because you can only keep a client for so long when you're just smashing them into the ground with fat loss. You know, you can maybe keep that client for 8 to 12 weeks, but there's no end date on working on this stuff. Okay, whether it's a reverse diet after, or whether you do this stuff before the diet, you can just keep optimizing this stuff for a much longer period of time than you can drive someone into the ground with a deficit. So this is how we keep clients for longer. This is how, if you decide to move away, or if they move away, or if they can't afford you anymore, this is how you can sell them just online coaching, because you're already doing it. You already have the systems in place, even though they're a one-on-one client, to also deliver the online side of it. So now if they move away, you move away, or they can't afford you anymore, you go, hey, do you want to carry on with online coaching? There's no, oh, what is that? How does it work? Oh, I'm not sure. They already have a training program from you for their other workouts. You already look at their food diary. You already look at their photos and measurements. You already look at the check-in sheets that they complete, and you already make changes and adjustments and recommendations based on all of that data and feedback via message and/or voice note and/or calls and/or screen records. So that is the online coaching side of it. You're then already doing it, which then makes it a much easier sale. Okay. So when I came to Thailand, I managed to keep a lot of clients as online clients, so I was already doing that side of it with them. So then it was just a real simple, you know, conversion, because it's natural. There's no friction. And that's how you make sure things don't get missed as well. It's how you make sure you're staying on track. You're not forgetting about what their exact goals were. It's, you know, it's where you actually are able to have this reevaluation process on the health markers. Are their health markers and health symptoms improving? And are they, you know, with that review document every month, are they actually hitting the goals that they set out to achieve? Like, is there a change in identity happening? Is there a change in habit formation happening? Like, all of this can't really be done just in conversation. That's not optimal. It's not efficient. It's not scalable. You're not going to remember that. Okay. So you need to create these systems to be able to manage and effectively optimize all of this stuff, which is then online coaching, even for your one-on-one clients, which then means when you're selling one-on-one coaching, you're not selling an hourly rate. You're selling a monthly package or a free monthly upfront package. Yes, that includes 8 or 12 or 16 sessions a month, but it's not all that it includes, because you're selling a coaching package, which is online coaching and one-on-one sessions. You're not selling an hourly rate. No more selling 10 packs and all that shit. It's just so dumb. So yeah, awesome. Any other questions, anyone? Thank you very much for your comment, Victoria. Super appreciate that. Okay, so, right, yeah, that's it then, everyone. If there's no more questions, thank you very much. I look forward to the feedback in the group. If you get a minute to upload little Insta stories, please feel free. If you get a minute to drop a comment on this video when it's uploaded into the Facebook group to maximize the chance of other people watching it, that's great. And if you wouldn't mind copy and pasting that message to me so that I can obviously selfishly post it on Insta stories showing that the feedback's good, then that's obviously going to be massively beneficial and valuable for me, and I would really appreciate that. So yeah, I look forward to speaking with you in the group, everyone, over the next couple of days, and I look forward to seeing your check-ins on Sunday. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'll speak to you soon.